Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Just Be. I am one of the co-hosts, John Emilio, flying solo today. I have the honor of having an interview today with someone who is actually very important to me in my journey, Dr. Tatyana Mestechkina from CBT for Better Living. Tatyana, please go ahead and introduce yourself and your practice.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm very impressed with the pronunciation. My last
I
name. Good
worked
work
on
with
it.
that. I see you've been practicing.
I
Yeah.
worked on it.
So I'm Dr. Tatyana Mestechkina. I'm the director and founder of CBT for Better Living. We're a private practice located in New York City and also doing virtual work in New Jersey and Florida. And we specialize in using evidence-based practice to treat OCD and all types of anxiety disorders as well, and have now actually expanded our practice as well to working with children, treating eating disorders and trauma as well.
Oh,
So that's been
wow.
exciting.
Yeah, very good. Listen, the more you could help, the better it is. So that's great to hear. So the purpose of our interview today is I wanted to speak more about acceptance commitment therapy, which for me I thought was like the cherry on top of everything. So I mean, while I explain it on the podcast for you as a therapist, as a trained professional, can you kind of explain what ACT is to our audience and its major principles real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, most people consider a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's also, a very kind of active experiential approach as well. What I love about ACT is it's empirically validated. So meaning there's a ton of research to support its efficacy for a lot of different mental health problems. And what also really attracted me to ACT is how like generalizable it is. And while, we do have specialties in our practice of focusing on certain presenting issues, I found ACT to be really helpful for whatever life challenges come up, both for my work with patients and also honestly personally as well. And I think one of the core features of ACT that makes it so generalizable and effective is this idea of like psychological flexibility, which is really kind of the
Yes.
the umbrella term of everything, and all the
Yeah.
principles are related to that as well. A lot of ACT is also like language focused, really helping us understand how like the language we use both verbally and in our
Mhm.
minds can really affect both our emotional experience and what we do. A lot of ACT is about helping people learn to better respond to their different thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, and how to be willing to kind of experience some of the ones, even the not such fun or pleasant ones,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
if they're part of kind of living a more valued life. And I think it helps people kind of learn what is and is not in their control. So a lot of really great things that I think initially, in our work at least, a lot of it is used to treat OCD and anxiety disorders. And I think sort of as your journey has been, John, what's really fulfilling for me therapeutically is seeing how people take some of those principles and then start applying them to
Everything in
kind of
life.
general, exactly, life
Yeah.
outside of whatever mental health issue someone might be coming in for. And then just to give like a brief summary of some of the core principles, and we can kind of jump into them as well. So the biggest one, or not the biggest one, but I think one of the starter ones is helping people learn to identify their values. So values are the things that we really truly care about at the end of the day, the things that we
Yep.
want to stand for, sort of what we want to make sort of like the compass of our life, and really using those to be the compass and help to draw the map of the directions that we go in our life. And then once we have those values down and are really clear about what they are, and of course, it's a lifelong process to continue clarifying
Yeah.
them and
Yep.
reprioritizing them. Then we want to really focus on how to make more of what is called committed actions, which essentially just means figuring out behaviorally how to do that. What choices can we make in this very moment that might bring us closer to those values? And then learning kind of more concrete strategies for what kind of gets in the way of that, and then learning different tools to manage that. So another core ACT principle is contact with the present moment. Another term for that is mindfulness, which I also know is
Yes.
something that really resonated with
Yeah.
you. And a lot of it comes down to so much of the emotional pain and suffering that we experience is when we hang out with our mind and all the what if thoughts about things that may or may not happen in the future, and all the should have, could have, would have that we beat ourselves up and try to find that time machine to undo. And sort of the antidote of that is learning to be in control of our attention and to bring it
Our
into the
focus.
here now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's why I love ACT, and I've everything about it has been and that by the way, that description sounds a lot different than the one that I usually give. That's which is why I wanted to have you on to kind of give our audience a little bit deeper of a understanding of what it is besides what we kind of speak about in the podcast. We give a very generalized, kind of basis of what it is. Now, um, even though ACT is a form of therapy, do you feel it's something that could be learned outside of therapy? Because it's so
Mhm.
close to mindfulness, and it really is what I consider a scientific version of Eastern spiritual teachings almost, because they really, they walk a parallel line. One uses words that you can understand. One goes a little bit deeper and is a little bit more vague, but I think they kind of point in the same direction. So is
Mhm.
it something that you could still learn on your own if you weren't in therapy? Let's say you weren't experiencing
Yeah.
OCD or anxiety, but you wanted to learn more about it.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely. So happy to answer that question, but just wanted to rewind for one more second
yeah,
because I
sure.
was kind of going through like the hexaflex, which in ACT is just like the main core principle. So just wanted to quickly give a
Yeah,
summary of the other few, and then we can go into that
sure.
question. So I think we talked about the values, the committed action. We talked about contact with the present moment. The other core principle is diffusion. So learning how to
Yes.
identify, and a lot of them are also, there's a lot of overlap, but diffusion is learning to identify sort of what our minds is bringing up for us, what the thoughts are, and then being able to create distance from them and take a step back from them. Um, self as context is also a big one, which is related. It's basically, I think, what you talk about a lot as well is kind of how to learn to be the
Yes.
observer, and
Yeah.
also very related to the diffusion
Yes.
aspect of it. And then the last one is acceptance, which is a big one that also kind of overlaps with a lot of them. And what I was alluding to before, really learning how to accept the things that are not in our control,
Control.
and then refocus our attention on the things that are in our control. And a lot of what in ACT we try to work on is accepting unwanted, uncomfortable thoughts or feelings, because that is just unfortunately part of being human. We all get those. Nobody wakes up in the morning with their like little menu of thoughts or feelings that they get to choose for the day or
No,
not.
it'd be
That would
ideal,
be
but
really
it's not.
nice. Yeah, I'll sign up for that right
Yeah.
away. But since no one I know at least has found that the way
No.
to get that menu or that remote control to turn on and off certain thoughts or feelings, it's learning how to create space for them. And then also, I think a big misconception about acceptance is acceptance that means like we have to like them or enjoy them
Yes.
versus
Or surrender to it like you're giving in, which is it's the total opposite. It's empowering, you know.
exactly. And I love that you brought that up. I think that's a really big barrier for people to kind of drink the acceptance Kool-Aid because like that's it, what? Versus like the dialectic that you can accept things and still at the same time not enjoy them, not like them, not want them, that you could accept things and still at the same time do the things that are in your control to change that. And even though it might feel contradictory, it doesn't really have to be that way.
It doesn't. Yeah, no, which is yeah, and that's why like I said, I'm such a big fan of acceptance commitment therapy in general. And so I guess getting back to the other question, then is it
Good
something
question.
that can? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I practice mindfulness and a meditation and awareness, but can it be something that could still be learned or taught? Like reading a book like The Happiness Trap by Dr. S. Harris, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you put me onto that book, honestly, it was another one of those. I know we don't like to say aha moments, but it was another one. Wow, well, this is okay. Aha, this is pretty good. Like he did a
Mm-hmm.
masterful job just kind of explaining it throughout the book. So if somebody read a book like that, there
Mm-hmm.
was ACT workbooks which you could get. Is it
Mm-hmm.
something that they can learn on their own, or is it really better always to do that in a
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic setting, as opposed to
That's
ERP, which we know
yeah.
has to be done, with
Well,
a
even
therapist.
that, I mean, so I think that's an excellent question, right? And the reality is, yes, while I think that like therapy is wonderful and it's really great to have like a partner and a leader and a coach
Yeah.
to kind of take you through that journey. And for certain mental health challenges that, and for certain people, that might be more helpful, or for certain people, it might be essential. And at the same time, I absolutely think that you can learn a lot of this on your own and get some really solid foundation with that. There's amazing resources, especially over the last like decade, last few years, even. There's so much more access to different ways of learning that. I absolutely agree that The Happiness Trap is my favorite, I think,
Yeah.
book for both therapists, and just I recommend it to everyone because Russ Harris, I think, does a amazing job of taking some of the ACT principles and making them very like user friendly, easy to understand,
Yes.
like language that's relatable to people, examples. There's even like exercises within that book that makes it more experiential. So I think he's really wonderful. Act Made Simple is another book that he's written as well that kind of goes into
Oh,
it
really?
a little bit more deeper. Steve Hayes obviously has a lot of great
Yes.
resources as well. Getting Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, I think, is a good starter
I
for
read that
Steve
one
Hayes
also.
books.
Yeah, that was a great
Yeah.
book. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And they also have, are both very generous, I think, with their time and resources. And they put a lot of resources out there, both by doing a lot of podcasts and recordings and trainings as well. And then there's also an organization called the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, which also has
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of like great free and not free resources
Oh,
as
okay.
well. And then, podcasts obviously nowadays are a great way to
Oh, great. Yeah. Very,
learn
very, I
things.
learned
And
they're very popular.
yes, they are. And it's a great way to kind of get information to a lot of people. That I definitely think that there's a way to get a foundation and these types of things just with resources that are out there. And then for some people, that might be kind of enough to help them to kind of apply them in their life. And other
Mhm.
people might benefit from kind of then going to therapy or in addition to going to therapy and working with like a trained licensed professional to help them actually like apply some of these principles to their life and help them practice them better. But then there's also again there's therapy obviously, which I'm biased because that's what I do. But I
Yeah.
know you went to like a mindfulness retreat as well, so there's different parts of ACT that you can practice,
Yeah.
especially mindfulness, as even like a separate
As a
package
separate,
as
it's a
well, like
package. So
practicing
you,
meditation, like certain apps like Headspace, Calm.
yeah.
So
Yep.
definitely a lot of ways to kind of get your feet wet.
Yeah, with it out without being in a formal therapeutic environment. All right. So that's, I mean, that's good because I try to tell people a lot that I speak with, to research it. And I always recommend Dr. Russ Harris's book, The App and Shop. I'm like, it's a great, he does a phenomenal job of explaining what it is and gives such great examples throughout the book of people, and we'll get back to that, and he shows you how they progress from one stage to another. So yeah, so I mean, it's great to hear that it's something that even a therapist says, hey, yeah, this is something you can research on your own and
Mm-hmm.
kind of work on. So as
Yeah.
far
And even like
as,
YouTube videos, like especially Russ Harris has like a
oh,
bunch of like little
tons,
animations or like little like metaphors that he makes into like cartoons. And they're, I mean, obviously you have to be, take everything with a grain of
the
salt when it
salt,
comes to
but yeah,
YouTube, but especially when it's made by or kind of endorsed
yeah.
by a trusted source, there's really great stuff out there.
Dr. Stephen Hayes has a bunch. He does a couple of TED Talks with it, and he
Mm-hmm.
has all those little cartoons up when he's showing you how to kind of see your mind, see that thought. He names his brain. So I get what you're saying, like they're cute little anecdotes, but they have a message and a meaning, and they
Mm-hmm.
resonate pretty quickly if you're really like paying attention to it. So yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things with ACT that sometimes people struggle with, that it's like very like kind of vague and like complicated in the conceptualization. And that's why a huge, huge
Yeah.
component of ACT is experiential and behavioral. And a
Yes.
lot of people would call it even like a behavioral
Form
therapy
of
because a lot of
therapy.
this is about like practicing this, putting this into action, like
Well,
living
that's,
this.
I think that's the key, is the practicing. Like, and I think that's where people get hung up a lot too, is the practicing of it, not just knowing it, but actually implementing it in your daily life. And it's something that you constantly do. Acceptance, we said before, is something you don't do once and say, I accepted it. Yay, it's done. It's constantly accepting until that ingrains itself in you and it becomes something that's a little bit more natural to happen. Um, in terms of OCD or anxiety, as a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, that's one of your specialties, and I know that obviously ACT was something that we worked on early on along with ERP when we were working together. Do you feel that, and I know some therapists do, and when I look for, if somebody ever says, hey, do you know anybody, I always look for a therapist who not only specializes in OCD, right? Because not everybody does, but also implements acceptance commitment therapy at the same time. Do you feel that it's widely used by a lot of therapists who specialize in OCD, or is it still kind of some do, some don't?
That's a good question. I would say, some do and some don't for sure. And right now, at least the most research supported therapy for OCD is exposure and response prevention therapy, ERP. And I would say that a lot of people
Yes.
in the OCD community also practice ACT, and a lot of them incorporate them very
Good.
heavily. Like even if you go to IOCDF conferences, there's a
Yes.
lot of ACT in there
Oh, okay.
and more each year, which is great. But again, obviously not everyone. It's still kind of up for debate whether you need both or not. And my personal experiences slash, some of the research, I think it's been really, really helpful. And you can attest with your personal experience as well. And I
Yeah.
kind of use like a little oversimplified metaphors, like ERP is like the pasta of the meal, like the main ingredient, and the act is like the sauce and the spices
Yeah,
that really
exactly.
give it the flavor and the
Flavor.
full experience. And I think ERP can be really, really effective, and it could be really, really challenging. And I think some of
It
the
is
ACT principles really help with like the implementation of the
of
ERP.
the ERP. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
and I think a lot of like I, definitely coach a lot of people to use some of the ACT principles during the exposures or to help with the response prevention therapy as well.
yeah, no, because I remember. I mean, the ERP was the not fun, but it was very useful in acclimating to for me was my OCD spikes for my intrusive thoughts. It helped it take it from an initial 10, brought it down enough where you were breathing now all of a sudden. And then that's when ACT, I think, really, for me at least, kicked into high gear. And I was able
Mm-hmm.
to then just keep moving forward from there and really exponentially getting better and better and growing more and more. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think I've
Um,
also find it helps people like the buy-in as well. It's like ERP requires you entails doing things that are really counterintuitive and really difficult and sometimes makes things feel harder than easier at
sure,
the beginning. And I
sure.
think especially if the values is like a huge part of the foundation, like why are you even willing to do this work? And people are only willing to do this really hard work of ERP if they acknowledge that engaging with the thoughts and feelings the way that they have is taking them away from living a values life, taking them away from being present in the here and now of their lives. And a lot of what leads people to do compulsions with ERP or to avoid, avoidance is one of the compulsions is getting really entangled with those thoughts and the false alarm
False
signals
alarms as
that come
well.
up or being really unwilling to tolerate the uncomfortable feelings that come up.
You actually said a key word there. It was one of the questions I was going to ask a couple of questions down, but willing for me. And that's where, especially with ERP, there has to be a willingness to want to be there and do the work, not just be there in hopes of, well, Dr. Tatyana is going to tell me to do this. I'm going to do this and everything's going to be better all of a sudden. A willingness to do the hard work, to be uncomfortable. I mean, I remember our sessions vividly, and there were hard times. Some of them were difficult to say the things and to do the things that we had to do. But if if I was just doing them haphazardly, just like I'm here because I have to be here and I have to
Mm-hmm.
not want to, but I have to be here, right? Language again. It
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have had the same effect. So I mean, obviously, I take it you agree that like that willingness is uber important in a client's
Mm-hmm.
success.
You nailed it, right? I
Yeah.
think that word willingness is really like the key ingredient for therapeutic success. If you don't have that, you can go to all the therapy sessions in the world. We could grow together. You can come see me 7 times a week, and it's not
Yeah,
going
young
to lead people to live better if they're not willing to do the really, really hard work. And I'm
hard
glad that
work.
that like really resonated with you as well. And then some people also where they get stuck in therapy is like they're willing to kind of go through the motions of doing them. Like as you said, like, oh, because my therapist told me to, like, okay, I did it, I did it, I did it. And then some people, a few sessions in will get stuck. They're like, I did all my therapy homework, I've done my exposures. Why are things
Well,
not changing? And it's because they're not really willing to do them like in the spirit of it, which is to show their brains that they're willing to actually have these thoughts or feelings. And if someone's willing to do the exposures because they think it's going to lead them to stop having intrusive thoughts or feelings forever, that kind of becomes counterproductive because a lot of the therapy is really about showing their brains that these thoughts and feelings are okay, not wanted, but okay,
but
that
okay.
they're an independent system, that they're the weather, they're not in our control, and that we can experience them and that we don't need to kind of run away from them, avoid them. We don't need to figure out a way to kind of whack-a-mole them every time they come up. And the purpose of exposures isn't just to like cross your fingers and grin and bear it
Exactly.
and get through it, but to show your mind in kind of creative, proactive ways that these thoughts and feelings are okay, that you can handle them. You could feel what you don't want to feel and still be here in this moment and still make choices in line with those values. So to answer your question, yes, willingness is
Was
very, very
is
key
very
component.
is very important. And I think the older we get, the more we get ingrained in our ways. Somebody like me, I was older when I started doing therapy. If it's not there, it could be very difficult. So this kind of takes me back to another question I wanted to ask. So young children with acceptance commitment therapy, especially if you see a child at a younger age is maybe showing some signs of anxiety or, you know, the common traits of it. Is it something that you can teach to a young child? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and if so, what's that age where, okay, I think it's going to resonate at this age, or maybe they should be a little bit older.
Absolutely. So I think that's a really excellent question as well. And I'd have to kind of get back to you with like the research, what the research shows for like what age range that starts to be an effective therapeutic technique. But what I can tell you is just even from my own personal experience of being a mom now and having a 3-year-old daughter, that I definitely not always and don't always practice what I preach, but I think it's really important. And I think one of the reasons I kind of really subscribe to this therapy is because it resonates so much in my own life and therefore also very much affects my parenting. And I think her, even as young as 3 and even earlier, there's definitely ways to like plant the seeds for that. Like we even have like a little mindfulness book, which like is very like, practice based as well. We like pause and we breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth. And then we touch things and we like clench our hands and kind of notice different sensory experiences, or even like there's like a candle or something sensory. I always try to encourage her to like bring her attention to it. I think also, and one of the things we've talked about before as well is this idea like I didn't know there was me and then there was my brain. Like I didn't grow up that way. That wasn't habitual. And like, what does that even mean? Of course, I'm my brain. Like, who am I if I'm not? So definitely, I think in small ways, also try to like plant the seeds of like asking like, oh, what thoughts are you noticing right now? What's on your mind? I think a big way that ACT has affected my parenting also is really trying to like both in how I communicate and helping her kind of normalize that it's okay to have unwanted feelings, even instead of like don't feel angry or don't feel anxious or don't feel sad. Like it's okay to feel sad right now, or that happens. Of course you feel sad if you just lost your toy or got an ouchie and things like that. We all feel that way, of like helping her find the language to her emotions and trying not to change them as much, but learning to make room for them. And then I think the values thing is a really big one, because that's huge. A lot of like role of parenting is to like both help instill certain values and more importantly, I think modeling them. So I think her being around, especially as she's getting older, helps me hold myself more accountable to trying to model values driven behaviors rather than just to kind of say, do it.
Being a parent definitely does that. I mean, I have 2 older children. My oldest is in college and my youngest is a sophomore. So I'm a little bit ahead of the game there. And we spoke about it even when we were working together, how I would, especially towards the end of our time together, I started to try to plant seeds in their heads, and nonchalantly, not like, force feeding it to them, but like, hey, what about this? And hey, that. And a lot of times they would make fun of me because they were kids and they're like, yeah, dad, whatever. But my older son now is kind of really getting into it. And he's more curious about it and asks more questions about it, which I love to see, because it's a great way to just kind of relate with your mind as you get older and to live life. So this reminds me of, and especially because you're talking about you being a parent with your daughter. Do you remember the Hershey Kiss exercise that we did? So when I first did it in your office and you told me to unwrap the candy, put it in my mouth, I mean, I didn't, I probably didn't resonate with me until a little bit later. I'm like, why are we eating candy? But okay, she's telling me that we're going to do it. But obviously it was to teach me to notice and not label. Teach me to notice what I'm experiencing, but not necessarily get caught up in, the mental pictures and the mental words. Like how important in the hierarchy of getting somebody, especially with OCD and anxiety, is it for them to understand, to notice what's going on in their mind, but not label those things and, say good, bad, this, that.
Yeah. I mean, that's for sure a huge part of the therapy for OCD and anxiety, and also just a really big part of ACT, because we could talk about ACT for hours and hours and days and days, but it's really about figuring out ways to test it out and put it into action. And I love doing the Hershey's Kisses exercise together as like just a very experiential form of it, right? And we always kind of start by like, most people have eaten a ton of Hershey Kisses, or it could be done with anything. It could be with like done with a raisin or
goes right
down lollipop or water. I mean, it could be really anything, but taking something that we do on a regular basis, which is eat a piece of chocolate, particularly this very popular one, as well, but to do it in a very different way where we're really kind of slowing down and noticing and having a sensory experience with it, like noticing what the foil looks like, noticing what it feels like on our fingers, noticing the sensation of us unwrapping it, of the smell, of the shapes, of the colors, noticing any memories it might bring up. Oh, last time I had this was like at a birthday party. That was fun. Noticing any thoughts that might come up of like, I'm really hungry. I can't wait to eat this. Noticing any like good, bad judgments that come up and practicing creating,
Yes.
noticing them and then giving them space and then bringing your attention back to the full sensory experiences of having one. I think could be something just very simple, really quick, and really powerful way to take some of these concepts of like the diffusion, particularly, and the
Yes.
mindfulness and practice it in a very
Yeah.
concrete way. And so many people are like, wow, I've never like enjoyed a Hershey kiss
Right.
this much.
So
And I
I
can
mean,
feel it.
I remember when we did it, and I was like, okay, I'm eating a Hershey Kiss, but it was the way the commands you were giving me to unwrap it and feel, hold it in my hand and notice, put it in my mouth and just feel the sensation of this. So you were pointing my focus to a certain thing,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean and I say it in my book, was one of my first, if not the first exercise I had in actual mindfulness, like to bring my attention to what I am doing and not just do it and following whatever my mind says, oh, eat the candy and just move on to the next
Mm-hmm.
thing or label them as they come. So yeah, I was it was a very sneaky, but I thought it was a great little
Yeah.
exercise.
I think it also
Yeah.
helps people show, I'm glad that you enjoyed it and it resonated with you. And I think it also helps people realize how not automatic it is for most people
Yes.
most of the time to be there, how common it is for our brains to bring us a million different directions and like
Yep.
the future, the past, or in judgment zone, even if our goal is to eat this or how much time we spend not even really eating our food because we're also on our phones or on watching the TV in the background
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Yeah.
well. So I think it's a cool way to practice that.
Yeah. No, it is. It absolutely is. I mean, really. So the only other question I would have, and this is, and I know people who are suffering and people who are kind of dealing with things, and sometimes the amount of information out there is so overwhelming. While advocacy for OCD and anxiety has exploded, especially in recent years, which is so nice to see, it could be also very overwhelming because you're like, where do I go? Who do I talk to? So, as a professional, what advice would you have to somebody who's just trying to find their way, or to try to find the right thing that they need to do, or the first step, let's just say, that they
Mm-hmm.
should take in maybe trying to get on a path to recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is just knowing that they're not alone in this journey and that help is out there and that we've come. One of the reasons why I chose to specialize in OCD and anxiety disorders, particularly, is because we've come such a long way in really understanding them and having effective treatment to just even have like the hope for that or that to work on their own, even destigmatizing some of it, that there's not a sign that there's something that means something about them as a person versus this is just what they're experiencing in their brain and without really fully understanding it or understanding what reinforces it or what leads it to be better managed. Um, just kind of taking that first step to know that that knowledge can go
You know.
a very long way. And then I think, we're going and we're trying to get connected with a licensed mental health professional and confirming that diagnosis if that's what someone thinks that they're
Yes,
dealing with,
obviously.
and then kind of starting the concrete treatment plan for both the psychoed for how to learn more about it, and then importantly, how to apply that to themselves. It could definitely be challenging, especially at the beginning of finding a therapist that's the right fit. So I would say there's lots of different ways to do so. IOCDF
Yes.
website is a great starting point. They have like a database with different therapists all around the country, all around the world that specialize in this as well. I did write an article actually a few years back on Made of Millions that's
Okay.
called How to Find a Pure Expert. I don't know if you could do like links to the article to this episode as well, but I
Yeah,
think
no,
that that's
I could absolutely.
great. And I think that even though the article is titled How to Find a Pure Expert, I think it also would be very applicable to anybody with OCD, even the more traditional subtypes, and I
Yeah,
have
I'm
some
sure it would.
suggested questions for what to ask a therapist at the very beginning. So I'd recommend trying to schedule. Most therapists will do a few like 10 to 15-minute phone calls ahead of time, even before scheduling a first appointment. And there's some helpful questions as well to ask. both about kind of their training and their history and wanting someone that ideally has ERP and ACT experience as well, where this is their area of expertise, because unfortunately, when it comes for a lot of other mental health challenges, it could be more up for debate, like which therapeutic approach is better or not. But with OCD, if there is someone who really doesn't like specialize in this and doesn't do an evidence-based therapy, not only might it not help, but it can actually even feed in to the
Yeah.
symptoms as well. So I definitely say for this, more than some other mental health issues, I think having someone with that expertise where that's primary focus is really important. And while that's all great and really important, I think also it really comes down to just like finding someone that you connect with and that you trust. And as you've seen and as you've lived, John, this therapy takes a lot of work, and it takes,
Yes.
I always tell people, like, I never want you to do anything just because I'm telling you to do so. I want you to like challenge and ask questions and really understand deeper the rationale for it. And it's really important to work with someone who's going to take that time to make sure that you guys are on the same page and someone that you trust and feel connected with and safe to go on this very difficult journey with. And sometimes that takes having a few initial phone calls. Sometimes that might take even having a few first intakes or a few first therapy sessions as well. And even though it could be hard and sometimes, time consuming and expensive even to have that, but I do think it's a really great investment, and ultimately choosing to go on that journey with someone that you believe is a good fit for you.
Oh yeah, I mean that connection that you have with a therapist, whether it's for OCD or whatever method, it's very important, because it becomes a level of trust that you have with that person. That the directions that this therapist is giving you is to say, hey, John, we're going to make a left here, but now you have to make that left turn. I have to have a level of trust. Say, yes, she's saying we're going to make the left. I want to make that left turn because I trust everything she says. So yeah, that level of trust in that relationship is very important.
Both that level of trusting that there's a reason why she wants to make the left turn,
Exactly.
and I think it's also really important to like have that kind of relationship where you can ask, like, well, why are you choosing
Why are we
left
making
versus
left?
then right here? Like, right sounds good to me. Like, what's your thinking
Oh
pattern
yeah,
for
sure.
it?
Asking the
I think having
questions
that
is
transparency.
Yeah, asking the question is very important. I mean, that openness and that communication with your therapist, I mean, is going to be a major part of your either success or stagnation in it, where you're just going to get stuck somewhere, or you're going to keep moving forward. Yeah, I mean, that's about all the questions I have. I mean, I can sit here and talk about this for hours, but I'm sure you have you have a busy day still this afternoon. I mean, on that, I would like to thank you for taking the time joining me. I'm sure people, our viewers are going to get a lot out of this. It was a lot of great information. I will get that link from Made of Millions, because I could do a search on their website for the article, and definitely and post it and get it up there also. That's a great something probably will be very beneficial for them to read. So I appreciate you taking the time. It was great seeing you again.
Likewise. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for having me. This was so fun. I feel like we covered a lot in a very short amount of time, did a very Cliff Notes version. So you can always dive
yeah.
more in depth, but this was wonderful. And I'm so proud of you and excited for you. And
Thank
I
you.
think you're doing such amazing work with this podcast and kind of getting this information, resources out there, and just being so open with your journey. And I
Yeah,
think that
thank
a lot
you.
of people will be able to relate to it and resonate with it. And I think you being so open about your experiences and what's helped you might make it give someone else like a little bit of a shortcut and
That's the
a
point.
little bit of like some fuel in the
Yeah, yeah,
car to get
yeah.
there a little bit faster. And
Yeah.
congratulations on the new book.
Yeah. Thank you. I
I'm
appreciate it.
excited.
And I will get you a copy signed, because you have
Oh,
there's a portion of it that yeah, you're a star. Yeah.
yay. Well, it's an
um
honor, really, and I would
yeah,
love to read it.
honor was mine. So but thank you very much for coming on today, and we'll definitely we'll talk soon.
My
Okay.
pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. You got it.